Remember when Star Wars was fun? When it had a magical, almost mystical quality to it? When the mythology was about the big universal truths that matter to all human beings, regardless of your race, your creed, or whether you were male or female? Remember when Star Wars was about virtues instead of virtue signalling? And when the political references were so veiled that you could go an entire lifetime having watched the films over and over and over again without even realising once that you'd been exposed to a political message? Or what about when the theme music was so memorable that it was instantly recognisable and merely hearing it would immediately draw you back into a world of imagination and wonder? Sadly, those days are now long gone. If the latest trailer has left me with anything, it is the unassailable belief that a far more appropriate title for Episode 9 would have been Star Wars: The Rise of Meh. There's just nothing of any meaning or substance there anymore. The blatant nostalgia honey trap at the beginning of the trailer doesn't even make any sense. You know the one I'm talking about, that montage featuring all of those memorable moments from the former glory days that is designed to rouse your emotions and fool you into forgetting about the actual disaster that the new trilogy has become. How does the new story even connect with the former events of the original trilogies, especially the ones shown in that trailer opening sequence, in any meaningful or consistently coherent way? The sad truth is that it doesn't. Even if Episode 9 was to reveal that Rey was the hybrid clone of Darth Vader, Emperor Palpatine, Luke Skywalker, Princess Leia, Han Solo, Obi-Wan Kenobi and Yoda, the trilogy would still be a dismal failure. So how has Star Wars been reduced to a shell of its former greatness when it was once one of the most iconic and influential cinematic franchises in the entire history of movie making, to a place where it now looks more like fan fiction being written by people who just don't seem to care about the basics of good storytelling? Remember how excited we all were at the news that Episode 7 was going to become a reality? I remember being buoyed when I first saw the on-set reports and web docos featuring J.J. Abrams talking about a return to the use of real sets and practical effects, the things that were the hallmark of the original trilogy. At that stage, I had no idea that these weren't the only ideas he'd be stealing from the original Star Wars movies. Then I remember leaving the cinema after watching The Force Awakens with a huge sense of relief that it was a better outing than the prequels had been. But after a while, it began to dawn on me that praising a movie simply because it was better than something decidedly average that had come before it was, at best, very faint and at worst, very vacuous praise. It would be easy to blame the fall of Star Wars on the monumental misstep that was The Last Jedi, but the fact is that the franchise was already in trouble before Rian Johnson's personal interpretation of a once great mythology had even begun production. There was clearly a major storytelling dissonance between Episode 7 and Episode 8, but can we really blame Johnson for all of this when there seems to have been no complete story outline for the entire trilogy, and when the first film was an almost beat-for-beat plagiarising of Star Wars: A New Hope? And it wasn't Johnson who created a new lead hero who was a Mary Sue and a stark logical contradiction to the plot that has been crafted for her to slot into. Remember, Rey is someone who was abandoned as a child on a planet where she was raised as little more than a servile peasant in a vicious dog-eat-dog world where the strong are the winners and the weak are exploited. Yet right from the very start, she acts like a pious and saintly character who was raised in a monastery where self-sacrificial virtue was trained into the inhabitants as the most highly prized attribute that a person can ever possess. Where is the cynicism? Where is the selfishness? Where is the hardened emotional exterior that one would logically expect from a person abandoned and raised from a very young age in such a hostile environment? The more I think about it, the more it becomes apparent that Rey is little more than a poorly written knockoff of Luke Skywalker. Lives on a desert planet? Tick. Does menial work? Tick. Doesn't know her real parents? Tick. As a competent pilot and skilled bush mechanic? Tick. Finds herself in possession of a droid carrying vital information that both sides desperately want? Tick. Etc., etc., etc. But unlike Luke Skywalker, Rey hasn't been written in a careful, meaningful way, and she has been left stranded in a storytelling no man's land thanks to the serious failings of The Last Jedi. What exactly is her struggle? Where is the drama? What possible risk could there be for a character who is going to face down for a third time the exact same villain she has already easily overcome twice before? Why is she even engaged in this fight? Where is the camaraderie and chemistry between her and her cadre of cosmic crusaders? Remember Luke, Han and Leia and their sidekicks Chewie, Lando, R2-D2 and C-3PO? Remember how they felt like a community of friends where each member was a fleshed out character who brought something complementary to their little fellowship of heroes? Remember how they each had frailties and weaknesses to overcome, and how, when they made progress in their character arcs, they never inexplicably regressed back into a former state of imperfection? Remember how they were part of a trilogy where each of the 3 segments progressed an overarching and universal narrative of good versus evil, and temptation, fall, and redemption? Apparently, though, criticism of this new inferior and bland addition to the Star Wars universe is now a cardinal sin in the eyes of the elites and their zealous acolytes. If you dare to speak honestly about the new Star Wars, you are immediately set upon by the screaming finger pointers and grand inquisitors with their sanctimonious self-superiority, condescending claims of your cognitive callowness, and their wild-eyed accusations of misogyny and sexism. Apparently they seem to have completely forgotten that all of us lads have had a long-standing and deeply held love for a certain princess who led a rebel alliance, insulted Darth Vader to his face, saved Han, Luke and Chewie in the detention centre, saved Luke Skywalker from certain death on Cloud City, released Han from his carbonite imprisonment, killed Jabba the Hutt with her bare hands, and saved the day on Endor with 2 deadly crack shots from a concealed laser weapon. No, the problem with Rey is not that she is a strong female lead. Star Wars already has one of those and has had her for many decades, and she was much beloved by everyone in the fan base right from the very beginning. The problem with Rey and the fantasy world she inhabits is that she and that world have both been poorly crafted, to the point that she and the other characters around her aren't interesting enough to hold our attention based solely on their own merits and those of the trilogy story in which they exist. Why do you think that so much of the new Episode 9 trailer was dedicated to showing you iconic moments from the formerly great Star Wars stories? The powers that be at Disney are desperately hoping that invoking these feelings of nostalgia will cause you to overlook the glaring flaws that their inferior copy and paste additions to a once great franchise are actually riddled with. It is usually at this point that critics of my commentary will point out the high box office takings of the new Star Wars films, as if this is an indicator of substance or artistic merit. Spoiler alert, it isn't. High box office takings are merely the fruit of big budget marketing campaigns designed to play to the vulnerabilities and worst excesses of our consumerist tendencies. And in this case, the fact that these movies are part of one of the biggest, longest standing and most important franchises in cinematic history. At this stage, Disney could release a 4-hour-long standalone film telling the backstory of Jar Jar Binks, and as long as they invested in a hype-inducing marketing campaign, they would still make plenty of cash at the box office solely because this is Star Wars we are talking about here. But box office returns don't tell you anything about the craftsmanship and other important aspects of what was served up to the viewing public. 2 of the most beautiful and well-told stories in filmmaking history, The Shawshank Redemption and It's a Wonderful Life, were massive failures at the box office. Disney might still be cashing checks that George Lucas wrote for them, but eventually the piper always has to be paid. Once the blind emotionalism and hype has died away, these films will not be remembered and celebrated as beloved classics. They will be little more than the forgotten fruits of our modern culture of mindless consumerism. In many ways, they are the perfect mirror of the cultural malaise that has overcome the modern nihilistic West. A West where, in the words of one Tyler Durden, "We're the middle children of history, man, no purpose or place. We have no great war, no great depression. Our great war is a spiritual war. Our great depression is our lives." In other words, we are a culture without meaning because we are a culture without a grand narrative. We have abandoned the unifying vision of reality, Christianity, and the very truths that it gave us and which gave rise to many of our greatest and most beloved mythologies. As the great J.R.R. Tolkien, author of the Lord of the Rings trilogy, once said, "We have come from God, and inevitably the myths woven by us, though they contain error, will also reflect a splintered fragment of the true light, the eternal truth that is with God." Indeed, only by myth-making, only by becoming sub-creator and inventing stories, can man aspire to the state of perfection that he knew before the fall. Our myths may be misguided, but they steer, however shakily, towards the true harbour, while materialistic progress, quote-unquote, leads only to a yawning abyss and the iron crown of the power of evil. Postmodernism, politics, and psychology have desperately tried and spectacularly failed to fill the void left in the wake of our self-inflicted death of God. And the new Star Wars trilogy is the failed attempt at mythology from that very same floundering culture. So it's hardly surprising that the death of God has also resulted in the death of the once great storytelling that was the hallmark of Star Wars. In place of the mythological depth that once made these films so universally impacting, we now have a franchise that is riddled with postmodernism, politics, and pop psychology. Star Wars has become just another formulaic product that is excreted by a corporation, and that we are supposed to mindlessly consume without any questioning. And that is why so many people are now completely disinterested in the third and final film in a trilogy that many people, including me, had previously assumed would be a return to former glory for a once great cinematic franchise. The prequels inflicted a great wound on the Star Wars mythology, but at least they failed while daring greatly. Disney Star Wars, on the other hand, has merely rubbed salt into that wound by serving up a middling mess of missed opportunities and mythological malfeasance. Regardless of what happens this December, the damage has been done, and Disney has now broken things that can't simply be unbroken. Well, at least we still have the old stories to revel in, and to remind us of the glory days, the former time, the time before the rise of meh. If you've enjoyed this content, please like, share and subscribe, and consider financially supporting the channel by using the links below. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time on Left Foot Media.